This is an inflection point now for the Golden State organization with Klay Thompson.
What is the path forward for Klay Thompson and Golden State?
Well, this is why I left.
I think the first real test of keeping together that core of Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson.
It seems like Klay Thompson's future with the Golden State Warriors is very uncertain. That doesn't necessarily mean it's likely that he leaves, but it is way more complicated than you guys might think. And a lot of parallels could be drawn to what's going on with James Harden currently. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Now that we got all that out of the way, to the intro. Last week I posted all of my picks onto my Instagram story at TheFlightMike, and a lot of you guys came up big as a result of it. I was 3 of 4 on Thursday Night Football, but when Sunday rolled around, we absolutely crushed it. I mean, I made $150 off of this slip, $400 off of this slip, and bro, this is probably the most heartbreaking of all. I would have made another $400 if Zach Wilson didn't get intercepted by Patrick Surtain II at the end of the Jets-Broncos game, because that pass was to Garrett Wilson, and they would have gotten more on their passing yards and receiving yards. I give away all my picks for free on my Instagram story. I usually announce them about an hour or two before the games, so make sure you have the notifications on Instagram. And if you haven't signed up for Prize Picks, use my promo code microphone and they'll match up to $100 of your initial deposit when you first sign up. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Last year, the Golden State Warriors faced the reality of losing two key members of their dynasty, one being Draymond Green and the other being Bob Myers. Bob Myers was the general manager that was the architect of the Golden State Warriors. You would not get the Golden State Warriors dynasty without Bob Myers. Steve Kerr wouldn't be your head coach. Klay Thompson would not have been drafted to pair with Steph Curry. Draymond Green would never have been made into a point forward, and Andre Iguodala would have never been a Golden State Warrior and extend his career the way he had. Bob Myers was pivotal for this Golden State Warriors franchise, but he recently left. Why is that? Well, our theory on this channel was because the NBA completely changed the CBA, and it looked like they directly targeted the Golden State Warriors as a template of the type of team that they want to abolish from the NBA. In the past, teams would be able to handsomely reward their homegrown talent with supermax contract extensions. These stipulations were put into place to incentivize superstars from leaving their franchises. And although there has been a workaround for superstars in the NBA to have their cake and eat it too, in the sense where they would agree to a supermax contract extension and then demand a trade, for the most part, you could say that the strategy was effective. Players like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, and Damian Lillard stayed in their respective small markets for a period of time. And the counter to that CBA was a team that drafted well and signed their developed talent to long-term contracts. Until now, according to this report from Adrian Wojnarowski, the new CBA specifically is targeting teams like the Golden State Warriors. The NBA is curbing the ability of the highest spending teams, such as the Golden State Warriors and the LA Clippers, to continue running up salary and luxury tax spending while still maintaining mechanisms to add talent to the roster. The league is implementing a second salary cap apron, $17.5 million over the tax line, and those teams will lose several key team building mechanisms, including the taxpayer mid-level exception, utilizing cash in trades, moving first-round picks in drafts that are 7 years away, signing free agent players in the buyout market, and taking on more money than is being sent out in trades. Now, why is this significant? Because in the past, the Golden State Warriors would happily pay the luxury tax in order to put together the most competitive team imaginable. As a result of this, they had to make some very difficult decisions this past offseason. The most famous one being, should they appease Draymond Green, or should they try to continue building towards their future with players like Jordan Poole? The answer was very simple. Less than a year after extending Jordan Poole, he was traded away for Chris Paul, who has a much lighter contract than Jordan Poole and helped the Golden State Warriors compete in the now. Now, what does this all have to do with Klay Thompson? Well, Klay Thompson is up for a contract extension, and about 6 months ago, Adrian Wojnarowski even said this.
Especially with Klay Thompson, who I'm told has an expectation that he would be rewarded with a new max level contract extension this offseason. He's got a year left on his deal at $43 million. Next year, you know, he's come back this year. It certainly helped the team to a championship last year. Had a historic offensive season this season. Just the third player ever to have 300 three-pointers in a season. But this is an inflection point now for the Golden State organization with Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and then Draymond Green, who could opt into his deal at $27 million. Warriors could be facing a payroll and luxury tax over $500 million.
And this began a very complicated conversation. Does Klay Thompson deserve a max contract extension? Bear in mind, as it stands now, if you pulled up Klay Thompson's statistics, offensively, he would look as good as ever. This past year, he averaged 41% from three, while averaging 10.6 three-point attempts per game. He averaged 22 points per game, and more or less, if you looked at his statistical output, you would say that this is just the Klay Thompson we all know and love. But there are some key differences that if you really looked at his numbers throughout the playoffs, you would see that there were times where Klay Thompson was a huge liability. Don't get me wrong, against the Los Angeles Lakers series in the first two games, he was masterful, but every game after that, he was a huge liability. Defensively, he's no longer the player that he once was, and in the past, he would make up for that with his offensive output. He really hasn't been doing that recently. A good example would be this past year. His OBPM in a year like from 2014 to 2015 was 4.5. The year after, it was a 3.4. But if you go all the way up to recently, it was a 1.5. You pair that with a negative 1.7 DBPM, and you get a player that is a negative in overall box plus minus, negative 0.3. Still a positive contributor, technically speaking, if you look at his VORP, which is a 1.0, but you don't give max contract extensions to 1.0s. And it gets way more complicated than this, because Bob Myers himself said this was a huge reason why he left the Golden State Warriors. He said originally on this channel that one of the reasons was because, well, the collective bargaining agreement changed. How are you supposed to keep this core of the Golden State Warriors together if you were quite literally being punished for putting together teams through the NBA draft? And I mean, yeah, they signed Kevin Durant, whatever the hell that was, a few years ago. Well, this is what Adrian Wojnarowski had to say about it.
There has been absolutely no progress on a Klay Thompson extension in Golden State. That they are both still apart on years and money, and there's a very real possibility that Klay Thompson goes into free agency next summer without a deal, and I think that's where it gets complicated for Golden State and becomes a little bit something of a high wire act, especially if Klay Thompson duplicates this year the kind of season he had last year. 41% three-point shooting, led the league with 301 threes, and his best points per game at almost 22 points a game in several years. In the marketplace, teams value shooting. They value high-level wing defense. And so I think for Golden State, this has a chance to become, I think, the first real test of keeping together that core of Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson.
So Woj says that there is absolutely no progress on a Klay Thompson extension in Golden State, that both sides are still years apart, and there's a chance that Klay Thompson goes into free agency next summer without a deal. And that's where it gets difficult for Golden State. Now, here's why it's more complicated than you think. During the 2019 NBA Finals, Klay Thompson went down with a torn ACL versus the Toronto Raptors. Immediately after tearing his ACL, he agreed to a 5-year, $190 million max contract with the Golden State Warriors. The very next year, Klay Thompson would tear his Achilles tendon. A few days before the 2020 NBA draft, the Golden State Warriors had the #2 overall pick in that NBA draft, and they were faced with a choice. What do? Do they select James Wiseman, one of the most raw upside prospects in the entire NBA draft that also fills a position of need for them, and stay by their, at the time, 30-year-old guard who is going to be out for another season, who will probably come back as a shell of his former self because, well, he suffered 2 of the most devastating injuries that you could ever suffer in the NBA? Or do they select the best overall prospect in this draft? A player that could grab the proverbial torch from Steph Curry and lead the Golden State Warriors into a brand new era. A player that so far in the NBA has been shooting similar numbers to Klay Thompson from beyond the arc, Melo Ball. The Warriors not only selected the lesser prospect and executed the cardinal rule of the NBA draft, drafting based off of need as opposed to based off of talent, but they also got rid of James Wiseman less than 2 years later. They essentially burned the #2 pick pick in the NBA draft for Klay Thompson. Now, I don't think that was done on purpose, but you have to admit, nothing screams loyalty to a player and to the original core than not drafting the replacement of that player with one of the most exciting prospects in that draft. That's 2.5 years that Klay Thompson sat idly by and watched the Golden State Warriors from the bench while getting paid handsomely for it. And now he's expecting a max contract extension. So how will that shake out? Well, this is what his ex-general manager had to say, and this actually influenced him leaving, believe it or not.
What is the path forward for Klay Thompson and Golden State?
Well, this is why I left, first of all. Look, a lot of times people will say it's just business, but this is not a just business situation. This guy, there's going to be a statue of this player outside of Chase Center. He was instrumental in bringing 4 championships. He's beloved inside the organization, the fan base. So it's not so simple as it's money and years. This is why it was hard for me. Like, you get relationships with these people, especially if you've succeeded with them. And that core has been together for 12 years. And that's just so rare now. It just doesn't happen. And so this is a delicate negotiation. From what I know and see, he wants to stay. They want him to stay. Doesn't mean it'll happen. But it is a test. It's certainly a test.
Bob Myers makes some very interesting points here. On one hand, it's very unique to see a core of any franchise be together for this long. You think of the Miami Heat Big Three, they were together for 4 years. LeBron James has been a member of the Los Angeles Lakers longer than he's been a member of the Miami Heat. You think of Kobe and Shaq, they were together for 7 years. You think of most duos in NBA history, and none of them have been together for nearly as long as the Golden State Warriors have been together for. So the fact that there is the opportunity to maintain that continuity behind a core that has been so successful for so long, even more recently, a core that has won 4 championships together, and it's very difficult to consider breaking them up. But the question is, how do you maintain a team that is this competitive under the brand new CBA? If you're paying Klay Thompson a max, if you're paying Draymond Green $25 million per year, which is a pay cut, by the way, if you're paying Steph Curry a supermax, which is well deserved, and then at the same time you're paying Andrew Wiggins, you're paying Chris Paul, how is it possible to keep all of this together without exceeding both aprons and crippling your opportunities to build a more competitive team should you need to do that? That's where it gets very tricky, and that's the reality of the new NBA. There are decisions that you have to make, and in this case, I think the most likely scenario that is going to occur is Klay Thompson is probably going to sign with the Golden State Warriors, but on a contract extension that is similar to what Draymond Green signed. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's made $350 million in his career just from the NBA alone. This is without endorsements or anything of that sort. There are some people that are speculating that Klay Thompson leaves to join the Los Angeles Lakers or join the Sacramento Kings and reunite with his former assistant coach. I personally don't see that happening. It really comes down to pride and ego in this particular instance. Is Klay Thompson going to be willing to put his ego aside and take a pay cut for the sake of maintaining the continuity and trying to win some more championships with the Golden State Warriors? That is something that we're going to have to wait on to see. A lot of that is going to depend on the chemistry of the Golden State Warriors this year, and Chris Paul being added to the mix is quite a wild card. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think is the most likely scenario here? Do you think Klay Thompson stays with the Golden State Warriors? Do you think the Golden State Warriors move on from him? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.